Thanks everybody. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. So I just want to say thank you to Vicky and all the organising committee for asking me today. I think I'm going to learn a huge amount from you all today. I've had a look at the programme and it looks great. And just following on what Frank was saying about sharing, I'm really happy that I can share some of the things that we've been doing down the road at Glasgow Caledonian, but also learn from you. And I think one of the best parts of my job is actually sharing and finding out what other people are doing, and it actually makes my job, I think, makes it worthwhile. I think anyone who works in education, but particularly education development, love that ethos of sharing. So I hope that you'll learn a little bit of what we're doing at Glasgow Caledonian, and that will be of some use to you. We've taken a slightly different approach than you here at Glasgow, but there are a lot of similarities, and you know, we're all certainly facing the same challenges around developing more fully online learning and coping with this kind of new digital age that we're working in. So when Vicky and I had a chat about what I could talk about today, she had quite a long list of things she wanted me to cover. I was like, okay, so got a bit of time. But this is kind of just a funnel and overview of what I'm going to talk about today. So I want to start off by maybe thinking about some of the bigger picture, if you like, some of the challenges and how we might conceptualise and how we're constantly reconceptualising the whole notion of a university, what it is, where it is, and how that fits into the concept of kind of a digital university, which is something that I'm particularly interested in. Then I'm going to do a bit more about the context of where I'm based within Glasgow Caledonian, within our context, kind of moving it down. Then I'm going to talk a bit about our approaches to blended learning. We're moving, like yourselves, more to fully online delivery, and increasingly we're talking about digital learning and teaching. So I'll talk a bit about that. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're approaching developing digital capability for our staff and our students, because that's really, really important, is upskilling our staff in terms of their understanding of digital technologies and digital capability, and increasing confidence. So that's quite a big area of work for us just now. And then at the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about learning analytics and how that kind of fits into this kind of our online and digital learning and some of the staff development that we're doing. So there's quite a lot to pack in, but we've got a bit of time, so sit back, relax, and let's see how we go. So I think it's fair to say that, you know, we're all facing a lot of challenges in the sector just now, whether we're big or small, ancient or relatively new. There are lots of challenges. As we all know, universities are incredibly complex organisations, and they've evolved in a way that has been quite different to more businesses in the community as well. And I think there's kind of a notion and a perceived understanding by the public of what a university is and what it's for, that is actually changing quite a lot, and it's changed quite a lot say in the last 30 years, but you know, the last 10 years I think it's changed a lot. But I think there is sort of an understanding of the role of a university. It has a specific role, it has a role in society, in its community, wherever it sits. That kind of notion of a civic, of a public university is very strong, and particularly here in Scotland and in Glasgow obviously is one of the leaders in terms of that developing the notion of a university. And that's quite interesting. And I've been thinking about this quite a lot recently, and I've been looking at this book which is edited by John Homewood called A Manifesto for the Public University. And he and the other contributors to the book have really been unpacking the kind of the notion of a public university, looking at some things that are happening in North America as well. And really taking quite a critical look in terms of kind of the increasing pressures that the sector is under just now, in terms of some of the market pressures that we're facing from government, and to be more business-like in terms of what we're doing. And he reminded me when I was looking at this of the term the multiversity, and that was coined back in the 60s by Clark Kerr, and a series of the Godkin lectures that he did, which are available on YouTube if you're interested. And he at that point was trying to explain what the modern university was there, and how universities had developed from sort of a single community, quite focused community, into multi-communities that actually were, actually quite agile institutions because they were changing and adapting and working with and for their communities. And he was talking about that as a really, really positive thing. And I think that is, and I think we'd all say that actually most of our modern universities, what's that, nearly 50 years later, are like that as well. But I think what Homewood and colleagues are talking about just now is that it's quite difficult to talk about the notion of a university just now in that way, because we have so many other pressures on us. And that actually there might be a danger now that the notion of the multiversity is changing, and because we have so many kind of business pressures, we all have to have KPIs, we have senior management teams, the structure of universities is changing from that kind of academic to more business-like. I think we can see that most universities have an executive team, a senior management team. And we're all driven by a smaller number of KPIs. So is that changing our multiversity into a mono-university that is quite a big thing with the three big things and becoming more like that oil tanker, just going down there? So this kind of multiplicity might be affected by that. I don't know, I just want to think about that. I think increasingly as a sector, we're managed, we're tested, we're ranked and rated like never before. And what does that actually all mean? I know here in Scotland, we're kind of one step removed from the TEF, but it's definitely having an impact on us, on our learning and teaching strategies and our student engagement. So that's having an impact on everything that we're doing. And I think there is undoubtedly tensions between the metrics that can be used and are being used and some of our practice. Hello, NSS. So enough said. So I think we need to, when we're involved in learning and teaching it, we have to ask ourselves some really serious questions. Because I don't think any of us want to be turning into some kind of monolithic, almost sausage factory that are turning out, these kind of standardized student journeys with, lovely customer success, satisfaction rates. But I think there is a danger there, and we have to be cognizant of it, and we need to be talking about these things as well. So, as I say, I think our understanding of university has changed, particularly if you work in the sector, quite a lot. And I've just started reading this book, Speaking of Universities, by Stefan Collini. It's quite a new book. I don't know if any of you have. I've just started reading it. I recommend it. It's a very, very good read. And I love this quote. We need to be able to articulate an understanding of what universities are for that is adequate for our time. I think that's really key. What is a university in our time? And I don't know about you, but actually I find it quite complicated to explain to friends and family what I do in the university and how a university works, because they have an image of, you may have you've got some towers and some spires here in Glasgow. We certainly don't have that at Glasgow Caledonian, but there's that kind of traditional image of university, and it's not like that anymore, is it? We have different pressures, and there's lots of conversations that I know in my institution that go on around and above me quite a lot that have quite a big impact on my day-to-day job. I'm not engaged in those discussions either. And I'm not sure if some of those discussions that are shared are really reflecting that. And it's really difficult to articulate just what a university does. Very difficult for it to do. So I don't have any of the answers, so I'm not building up to have any of the answers. But what I do want to share with you is some of the work that I've been doing with some colleagues in trying to unpack some of these things. And what we were talking about was about 5 or 6 years ago with a former colleague of mine when I was based at Strathclyde, Bill Johnson. He'd been to a presentation and he came back and he said, "Oh, we're a digital university now." I said, "That's interesting." And he was told that Strathclyde was now a digital university because they had a digital repository. Now, I'm not saying that that's not a good thing and part of a digital university, but we kind of thought there might be a bit more to it than that. So we decided to actually take a look at this and explore it in a bit more depth and develop a way for us to have a conversation about what being a digital university actually might mean. And to do this, we had sort of, as everyone does, that let's write a paper. So we have written papers, but to start off, we actually wrote a series of blog posts called A Conversation Around the Digital University. And we developed this model, this matrix. Now, these are actually much more circular, the quadrants. And we thought, from our point of view, and we were coming mainly from a learning and teaching point of view, that these were quite important areas to actually have hooks into thinking about what a university might be like, how you could have a conversation about different roles that people might have in the university. So one of the first things we came up with was digital participation, because that is absolutely crucial for a university just now. And that links into sort of what's happening in terms of government with digital participation and widening access. Quite interesting, about when we started doing this, we were obviously thinking about that kind of globalization, how you are global yet local. With Brexit now, this is kind of changing, so we need to think about that, because I think how we as universities are interacting with the rest of the world, as we all know, that's quite a challenge. We don't know. We're not sure about what visa implications there are for students. So again, thinking about online learning, fully online delivery, is going to be absolutely crucial for most universities in terms of their income stream. Very crucial for us at GCU, for a relatively small institution. We rely quite heavily on income from overseas students. So that's something we have to think about. Obviously, widening access in terms of you can have digital technologies. Allow the university to be open or to be more porous. I was at an event a couple of weeks ago at UHI called the Porous University, and we were looking at this kind of idea of open education and how you can start sort of leaking bits of universities out of things, and how where the kind of the permeability of people moving in and around these digital networks are. So I think that's quite an interesting concept to look at. Obviously, community engagement is central to any university. The networks that we have, both human and digital, technological affordances that we need to build into our universities, and open education. Open education is something that I'm quite passionate about as well. In terms of information and digital literacy, we had definitely when we started this work, we were taking very much an information literacy stance, because that was one of Bill's areas of research, and also we felt there was a very good body of evidence around that. But we were thinking about kind of some of the high-level concepts around digital literacy as well. And again, I think that needs to be packed. At the time when we started doing this work, it was when Michael Gove was doing a lot in basically with more English schools. But when they were talking about digital capability and ICT skills, it was about programming. And we felt that, and we weren't just alone, a lot of people felt that they were kind of missing out on sort of the wider digital capabilities that we want to develop within our students. Some of the kind of metacognitive skills, if you like, around about what tools you should use. So actually knowing when to use different types of digital services is increasingly important. Knowing about privacy, knowing about ethics, knowing about data, really, really important things. And also that impacts on our staff and student development, and how we develop and use our infrastructure. Moving over to curriculum and course design, obviously we were thinking about constructive alignment, and that's a lot of people are doing that. We try and support constructive alignment of our courses wherever we can, but also thinking about course representation and actually how you start sharing how you're developing things, and that's still a really tricky thing to do, even just within module teams, actually sharing your course designs. I'll talk a little bit about that later as well. How you manage course management. How do you introduce pedagogical innovation? I'm sure that's what's been happening as part of your Bold showcase. I'm sure there's a huge amount of pedagogical innovations coming through that. But all these kind of link to how we're recruiting and marketing ourselves, and reporting data and analytics. And then in terms of learning environment, increasingly we can't just think about the physical, although that is obviously still core to all our universities. We have to think about that digital environment and the infrastructure we're putting in place there. Kind of what Frank was saying there about your whole estate planning is obviously you've got a huge new development happening at Glasgow over the next couple of years, but you're also thinking beyond the boundaries of the campus as well. So there's, you know, the pedagogical and social environment. So it's actually about thinking about how we create the learning environments within our students as well. So we were quite influenced by the work of Jan Vermont, who talks about developing students as learning environments as well. And of course, research and inquiry are absolutely at the heart of university practice as well. As I said, we kind of took this more from a learning and teaching point of view, but we didn't want to presume that we don't want you to think we weren't thinking about that, and that all these things have an implication in staff and resources. So we put that out there for conversation. It was picked up by Keith Smythe, who's now Professor of Pedagogy at UHI, but at that time he was working for Napier University, and they were just starting developing a digital strategy for the next 3 years. And they picked this up, he liked it, and he asked us to go through and run a workshop when they were starting this work. We had a cross-section of university staff and students, and using this we had some facilitated activities, and they mapped out the priorities for them, and that became the foundation of their what they called their Digital Futures project, which was a 3-year project when they developed a new digital strategy and looked at some of their infrastructure and various other things as well. So that was a really interesting experience, and we've mapped this to a number of universities, including Glasgow Caledonian. So I'll show you what we had a new digital strategy that was I think it was just late last year that was approved by a board. So we've got the same thing. We've changed digital literacy here, so civic role in the common good. When we actually did the initial mapping just of our strategy, so I did that, digital participation, probably not surprisingly, came out very, very high. We tried to, as a university, in terms of our strategic goals, a lot about participation in the common good and working with the community. So these are some of the things and some of our priorities that have gone there. So in terms of learning and teaching, like many people, we have a big push in assessment and feedback at the moment. I think everyone's seeing that. So that's just how we've done that. So that's a way that we've started to try and have conversations about a university. We're actually looking at this now. We have just got a book deal, so we're starting to write a book on this, and about this time next year, it should be putting the plug in now, so ask me back next year. We might not have any of the answers to this, but we're going to take a much more critical look at this. It's going to be called, I think it's something around the intersection of policy, pedagogy and practice. So we're looking forward to looking at that. So we probably will just come back with a whole new set of questions. But we want to develop this model because things have changed as well, and now we've used it in a couple of universities. We want to reflect that and actually just take a much more critical look at the whole notion of universities and the digital university. So that's just a bit of context setting for you. So the context of GCU. So we're a slightly different university from Glasgow. Our mission is for the common good, and we're very committed to social innovation. That's our Chancellor, Mohammed Yunus, who has done a lot of wonderful work, particularly in setting up the Grameen Bank for women in Bangladesh. But one of the things we always like to say at talks is, he's been on The Simpsons. It almost gets a laugh. So that's a bit about us. We have about 17,000 students. We have 3 large schools in our Glasgow campus. We have the School of Health and Life Sciences, the Glasgow School for Business and Society, and Engineering and the Built Environment. We also have a small school for work-based education, which does a lot of our transnational education, particularly in South Africa. We have a postgraduate campus in London, and we have some activity in New York, which you may have read about, but yes, so that's it. In terms of support for blended learning, each school has a team of dedicated learning technologists, so they work with staff in the schools on a range of projects and just day-to-day support with blended and online learning. They're quite specific to their schools as well, so that seems to work well. There's quite a nice kind of hub and spoke model there, which has been in place for quite some time. I've been there for about 3.5 years now, and I'm just looking at John Kerry, who was there before as well. I think John and I, our paths just crossed. I work in the newly formed Academic and Quality and Development Unit. We went through, like many universities, we went through a restructuring process last year. So I was formerly in Learning Enhancement and Academic Development, but we've now merged with our Quality Unit, and we're now Academic Quality and Development. So I was in a central blended learning team. We've merged into one Academic Development team, so there's 6 of us in that unit. So this, I'm just going to try and explain how we work with the university. So this is academic development. In the inner circle here, there are kind of strategies that we're working to in the university, and the UK PSF obviously is where we benchmark for professional recognition. So these are the activities that academic development are involved in. I'm probably more involved in these 2 down here, but I do get involved in the other ones and a bit of quality as well. So we do we're actually in the process of redeveloping our induction processes for staff as well, with a number of colleagues across the university. So we have an online orientation for staff. We provide support for PhD students who are going to be doing some teaching. In terms of professional recognition, like most universities, we have our postgraduate certificate, which Vicky's an external for as well. So we have, that qualification that new staff are expected to go through. And for experienced staff, we have a recognition of prior learning, so they can go through a portfolio route for that. And we also have a unit that our support staff who are involved in student support but haven't got academic or teaching contracts can take part in as well. In terms of curriculum design, that's a big area for us. That's one that I'm very involved in. So we're developing, and we have a number of online resources. We're developing some more online learning units for staff. We have a structured program design support course, workshop-based activities. And we have a number of institutional learning and teaching scholarship projects on various themes at a smaller scale than the BOLD project. In terms of digital learning and innovation, there's a number of areas that we're looking at: digital capabilities, online assessment, and that should be, say, feedback. Couldn't get feedback on that diagram. That diagram took me months to do. Using it everywhere. So online and assessment is a big area for us, as I'm sure it is for lots of people. So over the next year, that is a key priority for us. And again, we're looking at evaluation and analytics. In terms of our colleagues in quality, as well as the formal quality documentation and approval processes that they're highly involved in approving new courses. We've got a new academic pillar programme, and they're supporting staff as well, and giving more support to staff and refamiliarising and familiarising staff with our quality procedures. And they also do panel training for our various internal review boards as well. So that's kind of where we sit. And as I say, I'm kind of more this side of the diagram. But yeah, months of work in that diagram. Months of work restructuring. Anyway, in terms of our strategy for learnings, these are our enablers and the key parts of our strategy, which was revised in 2015. So we are committed to digital development and to having inspirational approaches to learning, teaching and assessment, and we try and embrace the imaginative use of learning technologies. So I think that's really strong that we've got that, and we do that in lots of different ways, but we try and allow people a great deal of flexibility as well. And that's one of the most exciting things, again, I think, about my job, is just showing people a few things that they could do, simple things, and seeing how people develop with it. That's been really, really exciting over the last couple of years. So, as I say, we've had quite a lot, I suppose that blended learning is part and parcel of GCU. People talk about blended learning. I think it's probably about 10 years. It's quite well embedded. There's different levels of blend, I think, across the university. Some people are really well blended. Some people are just, they're just maybe having a dash of blended. But it is changing. And I think one of the drivers for that is obviously online learning and fully online delivery. Now, unlike you here at Glasgow, we didn't, in terms of MOOCs, we didn't join the first or the second wave of that kind of MOOC movement for various reasons. But we had a slightly different approach to open education more generally, and that was led by our library, and we were spent a lot of time developing an OER, Open Educational Resources Policy. I think we were the first university in Scotland to have a policy, I think second in the UK. And we're quite committed to open education in that sense. We've got a new open repository for learning and teaching materials, so we're trying to provide a way for staff to share learning and teaching resources as openly as they would like. So you can share it openly with the world, or you can share it with just yourself or your colleagues or your module, and it's quite nicely integrated into our other systems as well. So we're really trying to foster that kind of open education ethos. But in terms of blended learning, when I started, I was trying to get my head around all our systems and what everybody was doing, and it's quite difficult if you go into a university, particularly if you're in a central service, to try and get your head around this. So I came up with this diagram just to kind of outline the areas that we were looking at and what people were really doing when they were talking about, well, not just blended learning, but just learning and teaching in general. So we had the content. So there was the different types of content that people are using, you know, text, presentations, quite a lot of, even at that point, a lot of video and podcasts, people using a lot of that, the inevitable PDF, reading links. But we're seeing more and more people embedding content, and that's what I love. You know, if you can get something that you can embed, that's really powerful. So things like Box of Broadcasts, which that's a great resource. In terms of collaboration, we were seeing a lot of collaboration happening. Discussion boards, that's actually interesting. And one of the things I just want to mention, we're seeing more people using Padlet. Do any of you use Padlet? Yeah. How much do you love Padlet?
Yes,
oh God, we are Padlet-tastic at GCU.
But never try and use it in a really big, huge group, because
Right.
they're all going to try and edit it at the same time.
Yeah, so we've been using it actually almost instead. A lot of my colleagues have been using it instead of discussion boards. I don't know about you. I don't like discussion boards. I don't like any discussion boards. Stressful things in the past. But this is quite a really simple way to use a freely available tool to get some interaction online, to post something really quickly, and it embeds into our VLE is Blackboard based. Really useful tool. So we've got that. We've got webinars. We've just got the new Blackboard Collaborate. So we're doing more webinars, not just for online, but for campus-based teaching as well. We had an interesting session last week with some of our researchers who were talking to stroke victims. Obviously, they have some difficulties coming into, well, really leaving home or going to anywhere. So they were able to interview them and have discussion with them, and now we just send them a URL and they can use Collaborate. That was really exciting. Using a lot of blogs and journals, wikis, external systems as well. So I like to think of our VLE just a big black box that we can put stuff in. In terms of e-portfolios, we don't have a dedicated e-portfolio system. We have looked at them. Most recently we were looking at My Knowledge Map for some of our nursing placements. More challenges around the culture of that than actually the technology, but we're using wikis, blogs and journals and video and audio. Assessment and feedback, a lot of high use of Turnitin. I know that there's been sort of slightly maybe mixed experiences in terms of Turnitin here at Glasgow. We've got Grade Centre and Blackboard. Again, we're using wikis, blogs and journals, doing increasing amount of peer and self-assessment, and we're trying to get more feedback, electronic feedback as well. So a lot of these things are interrelated, but we've actually found this diagram quite useful, just for people to think about blended learning and think about actually what you want to do as opposed to the technology first. So that's been quite an interesting diagram for us. So I was saying, moving online, as I said, slightly different approach than Glasgow. Because we haven't had a huge strategic investment in any kind of online development. We've had to do things very much from a grassroots perspective, but we did have a little dabble in the MOOC world. That was about 3.5 years ago when the Commonwealth Games was in Glasgow, and this was quite an accidental development. My team and I had a meeting with our then deputy principal for learning and teaching. And I think Edinburgh he'd heard in the radio that Edinburgh had just launched a MOOC for the World Cup. You know how Edinburgh always do that? Anyway, and he was saying, because he was a real football fan, he was saying, I wish we could have done that. And we're all sitting around going, yes, I wish we could do that. And somebody, I can't remember who it was, somebody said, oh, it's a shame we didn't think about doing something for the Commonwealth Games. So we're all nodding, going, yeah, that's a shame we didn't do something for the Commonwealth Games. So anyway, about 5 minutes later, he said, do you think we could? So to cut a long story short, and this was at the beginning of June, Commonwealth Games started in the middle of July. So in a month, we did have something online. We did have EMIC. It was an interesting experience for us. We had no money to do this. There were no above the line costs. We all had to cancel our holidays, but that's inside the way. But we had to take a very much an activity-based approach to that and think quite creatively about how we were going to do that. So we did it. And actually what we did there in terms of using open platforms, a bit more agile development, some of the tools have actually been really useful in terms of the learning design workflow that we're now using with staff. And we're in the process of developing a new online induction for students as well, and that's very much going to take that approach as well. So we haven't got the same amount of support in terms of video support and AV support that you have here at Glasgow. We have to take a slightly different approach to doing things. If we have to do video, we either have to pay for external or we're doing, you know, our colleagues are making videos themselves, and so we've got just a different approach to developing things there, which is quite good. In terms of our online experience, because we're moving more fully online, these are some of the characteristics that we want to our online learning experiences to embody so that they're equivalent to the campus-based teaching. So obviously student-centred at the heart. Well organised, as any of you who've been doing fully online learning, is really key to have things organised. Challenging, inclusive, interactive, engaging, supportive and socially aware. At the moment we're doing quite an interesting development with the African Leadership College. This is a very ambitious new development to develop a number of universities across Africa. Their first campus is in Mauritius, which has nothing to do with the decision to there at all. But what they want to try and keep the brightest of best of Africa in Africa and train and educate those students in Africa. Because what usually happens is, you know, the high flyers go to the States, they come to Europe, and quite often they don't go back to Africa. So this initiative is trying to, I suppose, educate in Africa for Africa, and they have 6 very big challenges that they're working towards. So we are running 4 of our undergraduate programs with them as a partnership. Quite interesting, it's now sort of a hybrid model. It was going to be fully online. It's now slightly changed, so it's more, not quite blended learning, but the teaching comes from us in Glasgow. There are faculty in Mauritius that are there to support the staff as well. And the students have quite, it's quite challenging for them as well, because as well as doing their full-time undergraduate degrees, they're out on placement as well, so they're working with companies. So that's been quite an interesting experience for us. And we've been working with teams as well. But again, a lot of the development work that's happening for that is being used in our campus-based courses as well. So we're getting sort of secondary value from that, which is really good to see. And that's actually, I think people now are seeing how they could start using, how they could blend things a bit more as well. So that's been good. This is the workflow that we use with staff. So we start with the Carpe Diem learning design process. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's developed by Gilly Salmon a number of years ago. So that's really kind of a storyboarding technique. Then we move to another free service called Trello. I don't know if any of you have used Trello. Yeah, we love Trello as well. It's great. I'll show you a bit of that later. Then in terms of prototyping, we were at first trying to encourage people to use course sites, which is sort of the openly available free version of Blackboard. And that was so that people, if you had external people that you wanted to review things, it would be easier for you. What we're finding now is actually people are just using the communities within the VLE to do that. Then we deliver it, and then we have evaluation and review. So this is kind of the model that we're working on just now, which seems to be working quite well. So when we start off, we do storyboarding with our teams, which we find actually, these are just some examples, as I say, never underestimate the power of a post-it. Just mapping out a module can be really, really powerful, even if you're not developing something new, but you're just actually thinking about how you're going to deliver something in a different mode. We have quite a lot of large teaching teams as well, and sometimes people don't actually know what happens in the rest of that module or in the rest of that programme. So getting a programme and a module team together we find really, really powerful, because then you actually understand more about what happens in the bits that you're not involved in. So there's a lot of moving about things, and there's just some examples of that, and that's great. But at the end of your 2-hour workshop, you've got a great big A3 bit of paper, which is not the most reusable, sustainable resource ever, and that's where we've started to use Trello. This is just an example. This is quite a complex example of one of my colleagues did. This is in fact, it's our PG certificate in learning and teaching that this was done for. So you can, she's kind of put study periods, which she's blocked out weeks. And the great thing about Trello is it's really, really flexible. It's basically post-its, online post-its. But you can add things. So you can add a file to a card. It's just a series of cards. You can colour code things. So if you wanted to put all your assessments in one colour, you could do that if you wanted to do readings and activities. So it's a great way to give a very quick overview of a module, and you can share it with people. If you want to get really fancy, you can set deadlines. You can use it almost like as a light project management tool. But it's quite interesting to do, because basically it's lists of things. And it's one of those tools that when I've showed it to my colleagues, occasionally you get those light bulbs, you can actually see the light bulbs going off above people's heads. It's like that. It's really easy to use. It's really flexible. Some people, and not everyone's going to go to this level of detail, but what we've asked, and particularly in the African Leadership College projects, because they were developing them quite quickly, again, that when we were going for, we had a light touch approval event, so we knew that all the modules wouldn't be fully developed. But if they had an overview Trello, it meant board that you could actually see what was going to happen. It gave you a good plan, an overview summary of what was happening. I would actually really quite like this to be part of our quality documentation, because I don't know how many of you, when you get all the quality documents to look through for a programme reapproval, if you could just get some nice visual overview, I think that would be really helpful. So we're working with our colleagues in quality about that. We've written a little case study about that. This is what one of our lecturers in our GSBS said about it. So, it's really easy to use. So we've been really happy with the way that's worked. And, some people will spend a bit of time on a Trello board, some people will spend less, but it's good to have that to share things. In terms of developing digital capability, in our new digital strategy, that's a big part of our new digital strategy is, how supporting use of technology and developing digital competence and confidence. And I think confidence is a really big thing for us, because we get a lot of people, particularly coming to us in central units, saying, oh, I couldn't do any of this, I don't know, I don't use any technology, I don't know anything about it. And actually, we all use a lot more digital technology than we really realise just now. So it's just thinking about it and giving people the confidence to try things, because there are so many things that you can use nowadays. There's so much potential for using things in learning and teaching that is overwhelming, and not you can't possibly know everything that's out there. So giving people the confidence to try a little bit, or to say, actually, it's okay not to know everything, is really key. We're looking to the work of GISC in this a lot in terms of their digital capabilities, their 6 elements model, so we're looking at that. But I just wanted to talk through quickly a survey we did with our academic staff at the end of last year. So we surveyed all our academic colleagues. We got a 42% response, which is not bad, because it was done just before Christmas, but that's quite good. But we're looking at a number of things that are outlined there. But it was kind of a mix of kind of seeing what people's confidence, what people are actually doing, and what technology they had, because obviously if we are wanting people to do more, particularly in terms of assessment and feedback, we wanted to know what kit people had and what they were doing. So these were kind of what we're looking at. So some of the findings in terms of the VLE that I want to take you through that we found quite interesting. So in terms of using the VLE, you can see that people were saying that they're using it regularly, which is great. That's what we want, because we're all committed to blended learning. Regularly creating content, using learning modules, which I don't know if with Blackboard, it's kind of a way of condensing units, so you don't have like the very long menu down there. So it gives you a bit of navigation. So people were saying they were doing that. Some people were saying they were embedding external content somewhere. Adaptive release is kind of a bit more sophisticated way of releasing content after, you know, a student has done an action. So that was quite interesting, you know, if people are using content creating things. So that was great. In terms of assessment and feedback, we know this, more and more of our staff are using Turnitin. We've got a new online assessment policy, so all our assessments have to be submitted online now. So people seem to be quite comfortable with that, quite comfortable with interpreting Turnitin. Creating rubrics, not so much, but that's something we're working on as well. And you know, we know there are pockets in the university where rubrics are used much more than others. Using things like quick marks, again, not so much, but they were there. Doing things in Grade Centre, a lot of online text feedback, but maybe not so much audio feedback. So there was nothing really very surprising in that, but that was quite good. You know, we could see that people were doing things. When we asked them about developing online learning, though, what I thought was really interesting, that designing activities and curriculum design, creating, finding resources, they were, you know, not very confident. So although people were saying they were really, you know, they were creating content and structures and learning activities in the VLE, when it came to developing online learning, it kind of switched. So I think there was a lack of confidence there, that people are maybe confident in terms of what they're doing for their campus-based teaching, but not doing that in terms of fully online, so that they're realising there's a difference. But what we have to try and get through to people is that actually that's what you should be doing for your campus-based students as well. They should be well structured and well designed as well. So that was quite a useful survey for us. So, you know, time is a big thing for us as well. I think we need to have a bit more of discussion when we're thinking about fully online learning, of notions of time. I think we're all very comfortable with the notion of the 1 hour lecture and how long that takes to prepare for that, and how you can, you know, how that, as the more confident you get and the more you do, how your time changes. With online learning and delivery, that changes. You know, it's not simply just the guidance side, but developing things takes longer. I think our whole workload allocation, we have a workload allocation model which all our staff work to. I think we need to do a bit more work about that in terms of the time around fully online, you know, if we're doing more fully online delivery, the balance of creating resources and then when you're actually teaching as well and the support, I think that changes. Sometimes it's a subtle change, but sometimes it's quite a big change, particularly when you're just starting out. So we're having discussions about that as well. But I think that's sometimes underestimated by a lot of people. And I'm sure that you've all had issues of time, and there's never enough time to do anything. We need to make time for things. I am coming to the end. I realised just there that's a very good self-reminder of time there. So quickly want to talk about learning analytics. We've had quite a journey. Frank was talking about journeys. Oh my, our learning analytics journey. Oh, I wish I had another hour. But anyway, like many institutions, we have lots of data everywhere. It's quite difficult to find that data and put it together. It's been quite challenging. In terms of learning and teaching, even getting data out of our learning environment, VLE, has been a challenge. We're managed hosted. We don't pay the extra to get access to the database, so we're kind of limited with that. We haven't got the money to buy their lovely learning analytics package, so that is a challenge for us. But we do know we can get some data, and we can do some things, but we can't do the things that would be really useful. So we can get module information. You know, as a module leader, as a module tutor, you can go in and you can get reports, and you know that's good, but we can't aggregate up. So we can't aggregate up to a program level, we can't aggregate up to a school level, we can't aggregate up to an institution level. So looking across the university is quite challenging for us. However, GISC came to the rescue again. They have their effective learning analytics program, and about 18 months ago we took part in their discovery phase. So you were talking about readiness, Frank, here. So we actually got a readiness for analytics report. This is quite an interesting, it was a great intelligence gathering exercise for GISC, because basically they paid for consultants to come in and assess our readiness for learning analytics. So they spent about 3 or 4 days with us. They looked at some of our strategy documentation before that. Because we use Blackboard, we got a couple of consultants from Blackboard, but I have to say they were platform agnostic. They were really looking at our readiness for analytics, and they used these 4 measures, so metrics. So it was basically a rubric that they had: culture, process, people and technology. This was our kind of final summary. The final report is openly available from Edshare, so please have a look at it. We were delighted with this. In fact, so the consultants spoke with, they spoke with our deputy principals, they spoke to students, they spoke to support staff, to teaching staff across the university. So they probably didn't the report doesn't tell us anything that we didn't know, but the fact that it came from an external source was there. So we were ready culturally, ready with recommendations and processes and people. Technology we knew we had to do a lot of work with that. So the kind of things that I would like to do with learning analytics, not so much about retention and providing student dashboards, we're just not at that point. I really want to see what we're doing in terms of learning and teaching. Now, Blackboard came up with this blog post, I think it was just at Christmas, they came up just before Christmas. So they analysed, I think it was 9,500 programmes in universities across the States, and they came up with these 5 categories of how people are using the VLE, so supplemental courses, so content heavy, low interaction. I think those categories are really useful. I think that would provide us, and for me in an essential service, to have a really insightful, engaging conversation with our staff about what they're doing, how they're developing approaches to blended and online learning. And that's what I would like to ultimately do just now. We're getting data out of our student information system and putting that into the GIST Learning records warehouse, and we're just waiting to get data from Blackboard, because we're now in the second phase of the GIST project and they're helping with that. So these are kind of what the different patterns look like of put links there. So that's what I'd like to do. That's how I'm looking at learning analytics, to actually find out what we're doing and having a pedagogically informed conversation about the kind of support that we need to develop for our staff. And that all relates back to digital capabilities and everything that we're trying to do. So in terms of moving forward, we're developing more CPD units for for staff on developing digital capabilities and online teaching skills. We're trying to model as much of this practice in terms of what we do as possible. We're doing more targeted support. We're working with schools in a much more targeted way. We're continuing work in GIST Analytics programme, and assessment and feedback is going to be a big part of our work over the next year. And that's me done. So thank you very much. There.